and they're being attacked in company strength by the Taliban. Very serious. I mean, I met a British soldier in London. I was giving a talk at the Dorchester about a week and a half ago, and I was in London, and a British officer was talking to me. He said, "You don't realize how we are being overwhelmed in Afghanistan." There was a very interesting comment from the British Ministry of Defence about a month ago. They said, 6 weeks ago, they said British troops are now in the most violent combat they've experienced since the Korean War. And British defence correspondents put this up as a great sign. Our chaps are fighting just like in Korea. And I thought, hang on a minute, that's not the point. What happened in Korea? The Gloucestershire Regiment were overwhelmed by millions of Chinese troops crossing the Yalu River. We couldn't stand up to the vast numbers of soldiers that were coming in from the north in Korea. They were just overrunning us, totally. And what was happening, I realized immediately in Afghanistan, is that soldiers were being so totally outnumbered, they were having to retreat out of villages. In one case, I understand, 12 British troops in a school in a village were facing 300 Taliban and had to call in US airstrikes to destroy the rest of the village to save themselves. You know, one story which has not really come out in the American press, and I know it's a fact because I've investigated it fully in Iraq, is that in the first battle of Fallujah, remember when there was a ceasefire and then the Iraqis came back, then they had the second battle and they took the city and managed to destroy much of it. In the first battle of Fallujah, there were 12 US Marines guarding the mayor's office at Ramadi, the neighboring city to the west. And they were attacked by hundreds of Iraqi insurgents. And that 12-man US Marine unit was liquidated. They were totally eliminated. They were killed, all of them. They were wiped out. And that is not a story that's got on the front page, as far as I know, of the New York Times, but that's what happened. So the dangers you see that we're now facing, very much, I don't mean to make too facile a comparison, very much the same dangers that the Crusaders faced with overwhelming force from the Muslim armies of the 12th century, is that the local populations are now so full of fury and anger against us that they are attacking us in their hundreds, overwhelming force.
This latest news in Basra, British-led troops have uncovered an Iraqi government facility where Shia forces were torturing prisoners and producing bomb-making equipment.
Look, everything's getting better in Basra. That's where we're leaving, right? I mean, here we go again. You know, my colleague Patrick Coburn wrote a very good piece from Iraq not long ago where he said the problem with British statements, or particularly Blair, who's saying everything is getting better, is that to prove them wrong, you have to go to places where you will have your throat cut. So you can't prove him wrong, so it's okay, he'll get away with it. Look, there's no doubt that the Iraqi Interior Ministry is totally it's impregnated with the insurgency, Shiite insurgency, Sunni in other parts. You know, from the very beginning, we used to have these reports, men in police uniform have kidnapped Margaret Hassan. Men in army uniform besieged a police station, you know? And I used to say, hang on, there's not a Walmart factory in Fallujah with made-to-measure police uniforms. Bring in 300 more men, we've got the unit. No, these are policemen. These are Iraqi soldiers. The Iraqi security forces have been totally infiltrated by the insurgents of both sides. That includes the Interior Ministry, prisons, police stations. This idea, oh, we're going to build up the Iraqi forces until they can take over. And, you know, I love that line from Blair. From now onwards, Iraqis in Basra will write their own history. Yeah, they sure will when we go. Yeah, it's incredible the way they get away with it, these people.
And the latest news out of Afghanistan, thousands of angry demonstrators taking to the streets after U.S. forces were involved in panic shooting, which left 16 civilians dead and 23 injured. At least that's how it was described, panic shooting in The Independent.
No photos, please. That's what you were talking about also. We will delete you if you take pictures. Look, this is happening over and over again in Baghdad. A car blows up, a suicide bomber attack, so everyone in the area is shot at. You know, at the very beginning of the invasion, when the Americans reached Baghdad, there was a frightening circumstance on Highway 11, I think it was. I went there afterwards. And a US tank column was moving down the road. They were ambushed. And the tank commander believed that every car on the road was a potential suicide car. And he ordered his men to fire at every civilian car he saw. And when I got to the scene, there were smoking cars. There were women, their clothes blasted off them, naked in the backs of vehicles, children lying with rugs over them, dead beside the road. It was a massacre. Now, there was an ambush by the Iraqis. The Americans were attacked there. But their response was to kill everything in sight. And I actually talked to the US tank commander, he's quoted in my book by name, who said, look, I had to defend my men. I have a duty to defend my men. I'm sorry, yes, innocent people get killed.
We're talking to Robert Fisk, Chief Middle East Correspondent for The Independent of London. Robert, you head to Paris today for the French edition of Pity the Nation, the Abduction of Lebanon, then Cairo and Egypt for the Arabic edition coming out of the Great War for Civilization.
Yes, it goes on to the crack of doom. We also have, by the way, a Bosnian edition next year coming out in Sarajevo. There's 16 foreign language editions now.
But then you pack up everything and you start your Middle East reporting again.
Well, I'm still doing Middle East reporting. I mean, I was in Lebanon for the violence in the streets, of course, in January. Yeah, from about July onwards, I'll be full-time back Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, etc.
You mentioned Lebanon. Let's talk about the situation there today. This is where you have been based for the last 30 years.
31 almost now, yeah. Yes, I mean, I was, like I suppose most Lebanese, I felt up until July the 12th, the beginning of the war between Hezbollah and the Israelis last summer, that maybe Lebanon had a chance. It was being rebuilt. There wasn't enough money trickling down from the top to the bottom. It was still a lopsided society, with the Shiites being the poor and the oppressed as usual. But I thought until we came across, even when the Shiites pulled out of the government, which was a very serious matter because it meant that once again we were emphasizing the sectarian nature of Lebanese politics, that there might be some form of compromise. But once we had that strike, which turned so violent, I turned up on Corniche Mazra in the western part of Beirut, and there must have been 7,000 people, Muslims, Shiites and Sunnis, chucking rocks and stones at each other. There were 7 Lebanese soldiers trying to get between them. I went with them taking pictures. I mean, the stones were bouncing off the soldiers. People were chucking rocks from the top of 16-story buildings. It was very dangerous. I thought civil war was going to restart that day. And one of the dangerous things at that point was that the young people who were involved were too young to remember the civil war, which of course actually ended in 1990. They might have a faint memory. They would have heard their parents talking about it, and they didn't realize how quickly it would escalate, how quickly you could deteriorate. Even Syed Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah is a very disciplined organization, of course, was shocked at the speed with which his strike, his civil disobedience strike, descended into total street violence. And then, of course, 2 days later, guns came on the streets. Very dangerous situation because it keeps going back into a sort of semi-denial of the political crisis. We think, okay, well, Lebanon's out of the news, it's okay again. But the reality is that Lebanon is in great danger of splintering apart again. And I mean, I went out a short while ago, before I came to America, for dinner in a Sunni area of Beirut. It's a mixed area, but mostly Sunni. And I remember saying, well, how are you getting on with your Shiite neighbors these days? And the woman at the table said, well, actually, most of them have gone on holiday. They've left their keys with their neighbors. They've gone to stay with relatives elsewhere. Now, that's how it begins. That's how it happened in Baghdad. People moving out of Sunni areas, people moving out of Shiite areas for different religion. One of the frightening things that happened during those January days of violence, including the area where there was shooting used, is that the scenes of street combat were on the same green line of the Civil War. In other words, the old fracture between East and West Beirut and parts of West Beirut reopened at the exact Hazmiya, exactly the same point. I spent parts of the Civil War at Hazmiya watching the fighting, and there, on the same piece of road, it broke apart again. It's like, you keep stitching it up and it comes undone.
What about Seymour Hersh's report, where he says that the Bush administration and Saudi Arabia are pumping money for covert operations in many areas of the Middle East, including Lebanon, Syria, and Iran, in an effort to strengthen Saudi-supported Sunni Islam groups and weaken Iranian-backed Shiites? Some of the covert money has been given to jihadist groups in Lebanon with ties to al-Qaeda.
Look, Seymour Hersh said that we were going to invade Iraq, and I thought we wouldn't, and he was right and I was wrong. So when Seymour Hersh says we're going to bombard Iran, I remain silent. When Seymour Hersh tells me, he was in Beirut, of course, he met Nasrallah there, that we're pumping money into Sunni extremist groups, I think, well, hang on a second, he got it right and I got it wrong in Iraq. Look, the truth of the matter is that these various organizations, and there are some al-Qaeda type groups, groupuscules, tiny ones in Lebanon, and I've met them. They don't need money from outside. They've got money. Everyone in Lebanon who's got weapons has money. It's like the same nonsense we talk about how the Iranians are teaching the Iraqi Shiite insurgents to make bombs. Iraqi insurgents know how to make bombs. They don't need the Iranians to come and teach them. I don't think a lot of money is reaching these people. What I do think is that these various extreme groups are quite possibly being mobilized or encouraged by elements within what we now call the American-supported Lebanese government. What a kiss of death that is for the Senora government. Encouraged to remain where they are and to be available in certain circumstances. You know, a large number of the killings that have taken place in Beirut are not necessarily carried out by the Syrians. Hariri, I think, was a Syrian-engineered